Yeah. Well, we'll get started, but thank you very much for joining us. At least you were able to come in the afternoon, so it's in the first not here this not looking very pleasant, but it is less so. Kind of accommodating not only our town meeting schedule, which sort of delayed our being able to take up interviews, but you know, for sacrificing part of your Saturday to be here. And let me explain for the benefit principally of you, because my colleagues and I know what the routine is. We will give you a little opportunity to say, if you have anything to say initially, fine. Otherwise, we'll launch right into questions, and we will go in rounds. So Katie, then Joan, then Peter, then John, and then me, and then we'll go around until basically we run out of questions or run out of time. If there is a little time left, or even if there isn't, because this is it, we invite you to ask questions that you may have or add whatever comments you have. But anyhow, if you have anything that you're burning to share with us right now, please feel free to do so.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me here. It is really an honor and a great privilege, and I'm really excited about this opportunity. And I guess I'd say I've heard many presenters talk about how you don't want to be the person speaking after lunch. So I'm just going to go ahead and say, if everybody starts to nod off, I'm going to attribute to that versus my answers. And I'll apologize in advance to John if he's heard some of the material before. So don't stop me if you've heard it before. All right. And I welcome your questions.
I forgot that there's something I've been trying to do. I'm Janet Adachi. I'm this year's chairman. My one-year term is about to end, for which I'm grateful. The next chairman is likely to be Katie Green, who's our vice chairman, and then Joan Gardner is our clerk. To my right is Peter Barry, who has been on the board, I think, for 5 years, but this is his sort of second term. He had a term before. In between, he was practicing law. And then finally, John Benson, whom we've met, who was on the town manager search committee and also the finance committee before he joined us. So, Katie.
Actually, sometimes I think it's harder to be the person right before lunch, because we were all, we had arrived and we all know it's over there. But yes, no, we've got the energy. Yeah, I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about the process you use to develop a budget, in particular, who you like to include in that process and how you include department heads in developing your budget.
Sure. So I view budgeting as really a year-round activity. You need to monitor transfers, you need to look at how line items are performing. There are things that come up during the year that may require a shift in expenditure priority that you'll need to address. When you only get to ask the town for money once a year, there are things you just simply can't plan for. So the budget is as much policy document as it is financial. And so during the course of the year, you are living with the budget you have, and you are taking note of, like I said, where things are going, what community priorities are starting to emerge that really weren't present when you wrote the last budget. What operational priorities may be emerging. Maybe there are areas of deficiency. Maybe there are areas you are excelling at. So that is all a part of writing the budget, well before I send out the budget directive and calendar in October. That's obviously a all hands on deck process. When it gets time to actually craft the document itself, I work very closely with the assistant town manager, who's also the finance director. I'm fortunate in Long Meadow to have a very experienced finance director, so he's forgotten more about how to do the budget than I even know. So I'm very lucky in that regard, and I think that he and I work well together. He gets the information from the department heads, and he creates the master spreadsheets and all that stuff, and he identifies areas that are decision points for me or for the two of us, and things that may be something that are of note for the select board. Then we work, after we get the information from the department heads, we then put the document together and we start going back to each individual department head and saying, I see you have an increase here, what are you looking to do? Why are you asking for one more position, one less position? This is an area of deficiency that you've had. I don't see increasing the budget for field maintenance or something like that. So those are the kind of conversations we have, and then at the end of it, the town manager's budget gets presented to the select board, and they debate it to then present the select board's budget to the town meeting. And I'm proud to say a couple of things. The first is the town manager's budget for FY19 is the second consecutive budget that has gone directly to town meeting with virtually no changes from the select board. And I think that that's not, I mean, it's not necessarily my brilliance as much as it is the fact that we listen all year to what the select board wants, and so I know there are things that are important to them, and that's why we steer the budget decisions in that way. And then the other thing is we are also, I think for the third consecutive year, we've won the Budgeting Best Practice Award from the Government Finance Officers Association. So when I got to Long Meadow, the budget was simply a couple of spreadsheets and some memos, and now it is a bound document that you can read cover to cover that tells you what are the departments, what positions are in there, what things do they do, what are their goals, what are their accomplishments, how can they quantify things they've done. We put in pictures, and so it's a very appealing, approachable document, and I keep mine on my desk, and almost daily I go grab and say, what's the line item for that function, and what do we say we were doing there. So I'm proud of the budgeting process, and Long Meadow every year it's an extreme challenge because we have the highest tax rate in the Commonwealth, and we are lurching towards the mill rate cap, which a handful of communities are also affected by. And we're also AA2 bond rated, so it's not a profligate spending or mismanagement. It's just the composition of our community and how it's built out. So we work really hard to get efficiencies out of every dollar we put in the budget.
Joan?
I noticed in your resume under skills, you listed under computer skills, GIS as the first one. And when I worked in state government, I helped initiate Mass GIS. So I just would like your take on how GIS can help in town government.
GIS is, for those watching, for the uninitiated, is Geographic Information Systems, and it's basically mapping software. And I found when I was earlier on in my municipal career, I was using it to, and now I'm not an arc zen by any stretch of the imagination, but enough where I could take an aerial photograph or a map and put polygons on it and to illustrate, here's a redevelopment project we're working on, here's what it could look like, building footprints and things like that. And now that I've been, now as a manager, I don't have to do much GIS work now. We have a couple of GIS people in our DPW, but recently I asked them to go map all of the monuments. We have, a lot of residential streets have little stone or other brick monuments on the cross streets that were put in maybe by the developer who did the subdivision. I know actually my street has one. Nobody knows who owns them. Nobody knows who's responsible for them. I don't even know that anybody knows how many are there. And when you're trying to convey to, when I'm developing a policy recommendation for the select board to say, we ought to have a policy that talks about if these fall down, who picks them up, who's supposed to fix them, those types of things. How do I articulate how many there are and where they are and who could be impacted by this? And how you do that is by taking a map of the community and showing where they all exist. And so you can get a sense of just looking at the order of magnitude. So that's one way GIS can be very effective in a general way to explain information to the general public, but GIS is also exceptionally valuable in tracking where our infrastructure is. It saves a lot of time on projects when okay, if we realign a roadway this, in this configuration, the water, the sewer, the drainage, gas, that stuff's all in there. That's going to obviously be the cost drivers. So broad-based, I find it exceptionally useful to paint pictures, but then in a very detailed way, I find it useful to help guide decision-making on very specific project management decisions, and also, future planning.
Thank you.
Peter?
I'm impressed with your experience in collective bargaining. We don't have all the employees in town organized into unions, but clearly public safety personnel and DPW, municipal properties, an important part of the town operation. And we've had very good relations with our unions. We have no grievances generally or unfair labor practice charges, and are able to negotiate reasonable agreements. But this question goes more to your general management skills. How big is the city of Lancaster, Wisconsin? How many people live there?
About 4,000.
Oh, so
But
it's
I will tell you,
small.
well, it's the county seat, so
Okay.
it plays bigger than that.
Yeah,
We have a police department, we have, the county, like I said, is the county seat, and a lot of things are done by county government in
okay,
Wisconsin.
oh, right.
So
okay.
we collaborate regularly with the health department, for example, as a county agency.
Yeah, well, it looks like you were, my understanding is Wisconsin used to have similar public sector collective bargaining laws to Massachusetts. It looks like you were in the middle of the Scott Walker revolution when he took away all the rights of the public sector unions. How did that affect your employees in Lancaster, and how did you deal with it? Were they marching on the state capitol every day with everybody else?
I think there were certainly the teachers in Lancaster got organized and marched to preserve their collective bargaining rights. And I will tell you, it was a game changer in many ways, and it affected the employees and I think employee morale quite a bit. And you're right, I bargained one contract, and of course he exempted public safety. But for example, the DPW employees, I bargained one contract with them before what's called Act 10, is the law that stripped the rights. And then I bargained a contract with them after Act 10. And their collective bargaining agreement was 20 pages, like most of them are, before Act 10, and then it was about 3 pages after Act 10, where they became subject to our personnel manual versus independently bargained, working conditions. We wrote our personnel manual based on the collective bargaining agreements we had in place. We wanted to be fair and reasonable. We didn't want to, it's a good team, and they're good people that work there. And so even though we were going to exercise the new rights we had as management, we were still going to treat the employees fairly and not dramatically upend their working conditions. I think the single biggest change that we made as a result of Act 10 was we went from a standard HMO plan to a high deductible HSA plan where the town or the city would pay the deductible. And that ended up, even though we paid 100% of the deductible, we still saved some money on our health insurance. And the amount of deductible the city paid would then be a future bargainable item. That was the single biggest change, and I mean, and again, our goal in making that change in health insurance was to make sure people didn't have to change doctors or anything like that. It was just the financial structure of it. But it's one of those things, like, you had to be there. That was really intense. And I guess as a public administrator, I had never really seen anything like that.
All right, thank you, that's unique.
That's a great question. Thanks, Peter.
John?
Steve, I will have 2 questions for you that came to me from former select board members. The first is on local transportation. Acton has been leading the region in developing transportation solutions for commuters, driving their cars to local lots, the fire station or one of the churches,
Is that
and then
the Crosstown
being picked
Connect?
up there. Crosstown, yes, exactly. And that also goes to rides for seniors, disabled, and children in pinches late in the afternoon, and serving underserved elements of the parts of the community. And we've received an award from your International Association of Managers for that. Could you share your thoughts for suburban transportation services, both the challenges and the possible solutions?
Sure. Longmeadow, actually, I helped enter Longmeadow into a intermunicipal agreement with East Longmeadow and Hamden to basically take on, I should say, the dial-a-ride program that the Pioneer Valley Regional Transit Agency, the RTA for Springfield area is called Pioneer Valley Regional Transit Agency. They want to get out of the dial-a-ride business, and that's really the senior ride versus paratransit, which they're still required to do. And so we worked with the other 2 communities to create a intermunicipal agreement, it's in effect a pilot project that hasn't been done in Western Mass. And so when I saw the Crosstown Connect program, I thought, dude, this is really great. This is exactly what we're trying to do, except you guys are light years ahead of where we are. There's absolutely no doubt that transportation ties to aging in place, which is a big issue for the senior community, which ties to the stability of your housing real estate market. So people, you don't have, because I'm sure like a lot like Long Meadow, where you have a large senior population. You don't want them all selling their houses at once. You want to give people the opportunity to age in place, and transportation is an essential ingredient to that. I think the additional element that you guys have of commuters, we don't really have a rail yet that is highly developed in Springfield, so the commuter thing's not there for us yet. But that is a really tremendous amenity for the community, and I think you have it right. Regionalize, find efficiencies and economies of scale, and make it the best service as it can possibly be, so more people want to do it.
Well, thank you.
I'd love to tell you I could improve on it, but you guys have it going pretty good.
My turn. I actually am going to ask you a different question that comes from some of your responses. And this has to do with the formation of a regional dispatch district. You know, there's increasing focus in our area on regionalization. I mean, the transportation effort is one. It's been an attempt to sort of develop something similar with dispatch. And I'm just wondering how you were, I know that you said there were up to 6 communities and now there are 2, but I was just wondering what you had to do to persuade communities to participate, and then maybe you could explain what happened. I mean, why the numbers have changed, but yeah.
So the key ingredient for dispatch, and I suppose this is probably transferable to other issues. In this case, with Westcom, our regional dispatch effort, is that the service chiefs are 100% on board. And if you don't have that, it's very difficult to achieve regionalization of a public safety component. And it's not to say that a service chief that isn't in favor of regionalization is unjustified. Every service chief I've ever encountered, and service chief, police, and fire, everyone I've ever encountered is committed 100% to the safety of their community in doing that in the way that they see best fits the needs of their community. Long Meadow's police and actually the previous 2 police and fire chiefs, who both retired relatively closely together, and then the 2 new ones have carried forward that desire to regionalize. We've had, and many communities share that desire, but it's very complex to consolidate dispatch operations, small little 1 or 2 person PSAPs, is what they call them, into a larger scale operation while maintaining that same quality of service that you get. You know, when our regional dispatch center will be in the city of Chicopee, but we want Long Meadow residents to think that they're talking to somebody at the Long Meadow Police Department. And listen, they do this everywhere. I want to say Texas or California has like 5 dispatch centers for the whole state. So Massachusetts is a little late to this party as well. It's been done. We are not going to reinvent the wheel here. But local identity, local community identity is so important in the Commonwealth. And you can see that, not to get off track on them, but you can see that with all the senior centers that are being proposed to be built and everything else. I mean, people really want to stay in their hometown for their own services, but the way our finances are structured with Proposition 2.5, it's not really a long-term sustainable model. So that the key ingredients are having the service chiefs on board, having communities that don't necessarily have to be but are willing to partner, be together, and then know that in that dispatch center, there'll be dispatchers for Long Meadow who handle Long Meadow calls in the way we do it, and there'll be Chicopee dispatchers who handle their calls. I'll give you an example. Worcester, the city of Worcester has in their dispatch center Leicester. And Leicester's a smaller town than Long Meadow. I mean, it's a very small town. And if those 2 disparate entities can figure out a way to make it work together, then any 2 communities can figure it out. And that's something that I think if the town of Acton's interested in pursuing, as I said, I've been the chair of the effort since its inception. So I bear some responsibility for the variation, communities willing to stick it out, and then subsequently kind of getting cold feet, but also our drive to make this happen, because I think the people that the towns that are still involved, we have every confidence that once we get going and prove that it works, the other towns are going to come back in.
Thank you. Katie?
Thank you. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how you like to communicate with your Board of Selectmen and what you have found has worked for you in terms of developing those relationships and communications, and what has not worked for you in the past when working with your Board of Selectmen.
So we communicate a lot by email, phone call, sometimes text message. We also obviously do a lot of written communications in the forms of memos and things like that. We have the select board meets at first and third Mondays, and there's packets involved and all that stuff. So the basics are all there for us. There are certain things, you know, and that's really the relationship between the manager and the individual board somewhat drives like what they want to be informed of, when they want to be informed of it. Different boards have different expectations of the kind of small things. Obviously, a threshold thing is if I know that it's going to be in the newspaper, I really need to let the select board know before it gets there. That's basic. And if they read it in the paper and they didn't hear about it from me, then I am 100% accountable for not keeping them informed. And there are times that happens because I didn't know it was going to be in the paper either. This is where police departments have their own Facebook pages, you know, set you up for that, because they'll post on their Facebook page, and then, you know, the newspaper picks it up right away, and then I didn't see that. You know, I think the biggest thing is making sure that each board member has access to all the same information in the same story, and I try very hard to make sure I'm communicating the same information to each of them. And you know, I consider myself a say what I mean what I say type person anyway, and I try and be as honest and forthright as I possibly can be, because it's the easiest way to be, because you don't have to remember what you said. If you're not being honest, you don't have to, you know, you can't keep remembering the dishonest things you may have said. So I'm candid and I'm straightforward, and I give the information in as unvarnished way as I possibly can to the board, so they can make their own decisions. And I think that that's important. So one of the things that works is, I think our meetings are, you know, they have their moments, like almost like any families have when you work so closely with people, but I think we communicate well in meetings. I listen to them and what they expect, and I know that they listen to me when I give them an answer on a question, or I think they have trust that when I'm bringing something to them, they know it's fairly well thought out, but certainly not perfect. One of the things that doesn't work well, I don't do a lot of individual meetings with them. I usually, the tradition in Long Meadow is that the chair at the time meets with the town manager extensively. And then the chair is the bridge between the manager and the rest of the board. They've just done it that way since well before my time. Early on, I tried to implement bi-weekly individual meetings with each of them to talk things out. You know, we talk about the Red Sox, talk about a policy issue that's coming up, just be in the same room and communicate face to face, you know, once every other week, or even once a month, depending on what was happening. And they, you know, the board, they weren't really all that into it at the time, and so I didn't get it started at the beginning. And I wish I had, because I think, even though I think I have a very good relationship with the select board, and I do think that we communicate well, and when they want to talk to me, they call me and we talk. Having that check-in built into the schedule, I think, is important. And so if I could do it all over again, I would push harder to have those meetings. Nobody's perfect.
Yeah. We got two of those.
Well, at least two members of the board.
You have to use your microphone, or were you
I was making a joke
intentionally
about the Yankees.
avoiding it because, you know, but, well, and in all candor, my husband is a Yankees fan, so, you know, and I'm sort of in the middle, I take no sides anyhow, but, yeah.
Truth be told, Long Meadow is purple country in that regard.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, my husband's from Connecticut, and he came from the part that was Yankee territory, so people have to understand. But it's really very comforting to me to know that there are other people. Not the only one. Joan?
I'm the board's liaison to the Commission on Disabilities, And if you or a family member had a temporary or permanent disability, what kind of services would you want?
So I think I would want all of the services that I was guaranteed under the law, but I would also want those services to be personalized to the greatest extent possible, localized to the greatest extent possible, and I think I would want to make sure that if there were areas of service that were going to be more difficult for me to access, I would want to know why and just make sure that I'm managing my expectations correctly. And I think that, especially at the local level, we have the opportunity to work directly with people and on an individualized basis get a sense for what are their needs, what are their transportation needs, do they have, and the schools are obviously structured around this much more highly than I think the general government side with IEPs and things like that. But you know, I think that model that the schools have is a good one. It's not easy to implement when you're trying to provide a relatively equal level of service for 24,000 or 25,000 people. But I think we'd want to make sure that if we had someone who needed something extra, again, we want to make sure that we fully comply with what we're obligated to provide for them, and then see how much better than that could we do.
Thank you.
And I don't know if I answered the question specifically enough for you.
That's fine.
Thank you.
Peter?
Okay, you mentioned in your cover letter, Steve, your work on a district improvement financing district in Western Mass, first TIF to include 2 towns. We've had 2 TIFs in town. I actually heard the acronym DIF the other day, but I don't know what it is. So can you tell us what it is and what you did to bring it about and how it's helping the town of Longmeadow?
And what was the last part of that, Peter?
How it's helping the town of Longmeadow.
So in a previous life, I did a lot of economic development and community development. And I know TIFs are the older version of a tax incentive for development in the Commonwealth. And a TIF is basically an abatement. Whereas a DIF is something that the catchphrase is growth to pay for growth. And if you want to attract a development or a development is coming and public infrastructure improvements are needed, you can bond for those improvements and use the increment of increased value that the development creates and bond against that future increment. So in the case of Longmeadow, there is a vacant 7-acre parcel, and that was like one of my best days in Longmeadow. The developer, who's an excellent developer, came and said, we want to build a medical office building here. And it's right on the line with East Longmeadow. And I said, wait, that's in town? Great, whatever you need, because it's in the commercial zone. There wasn't going to be any controversial zone change or anything like that. It just was like fell out of the sky. And that corridor that it's on is a very difficult stretch of road for Longmeadow, and it really has needed upgrades for years, but it's extremely expensive. So that developer is building that 50,000 square foot medical office building, and it's going to be worth millions of dollars. And so it's going to generate, I think, $175,000 in annual tax revenue on top of the $8,000 we're collecting on the vacant lot. So the difference between the $8,000 and the $175,000 is the increment. And so we can bond theoretically up to the $168,000 a year, which is a couple $1 million anyway, to pay for the improvements over a 20-year term. And then after the 20-year term, that revenue then goes into the general fund. Where this particular DIF works really well is that his site plan that's approved allows him to build a second 25,000 square foot building. And so the roadway improvements that a planning board would normally look to for impacts and mitigation are already done. We're in fact, I think the bid's open next week. We're already doing that. So that 25,000 square foot building is essentially gravy for the general fund. And then, oh, by the way, the quality of life for people in that corner of town and the traffic issues are also going to be resolved as kind of it's funny that that's the secondary benefit, but in this one project, that is a secondary benefit. And it is a regionally significant corridor. So I'm really excited about that. That was one that, like I said, in this job, every once in a while, you just, you find a lucky penny, and that was one of them for us.
If I could just follow up quickly, does that require what, town meeting approval to enter into the DIF agreement, or,
Yes.
and bonding, obviously?
So the bonding obviously requires that the town meeting has to vote on the financing plan and the map and then the program. So there was three separate town meeting votes, and one of the things that the current administration did was they devolved approval of DIFs to the local level, whereas before it had to go to the ACC at the state. And I worked at the city of Worcester when the first DIF ever was done for the City Square project, and the DIF documents were like that. It was mind-numbing how complicated it was, and devolving it to the local level, allowing the municipalities really to make their decisions about what kind of growth they want, how they want to pay for it. You know, the DIF documents are like that now, and it's a great win. I'm proud to be a part of it, and you know, Long Meadow and East Long Meadow work closely together in both ways, large and small, in the same way that I'm sure Acton works with Westford and your other surrounding communities. And so it was really an easy lift for us to say, hey, why don't we get together? And as it turns out, there was a project in the same kind of campus, but on the East Long Meadow side of the line that was different. A different developer, was an existing nursing home, was doing a big expansion. So the timing of everything fell into place. We were able to go to East Long Meadow and say, as a part of our Long Meadow project, we're going to fix the intersection that's in your town, and there's going to be a developer payment from your project that's going to compensate us for that work. And you know, it was really easy.
John?
Yes, Steve, this was the second question from a former select board member, and it concerns growth. Growth in residential and commercial development is a big issue in town. And during my recent campaign for the board, there were legitimate concerns raised from individuals who want, you know, no growth at all. Preserve the character of Acton. Let's not drain our resources down. And to the other side of those who want economic development, who want to give some relief on the tax base, and just provide, you know, greater options for entertaining, particularly dining out. I can comfortably say that outside of 40B developments, there was universal agreement among people to end high-density residential development. So could you share with us, please, your thoughts on these points?
Sure. I'm of the belief that you maintain a community's character by managing change, not by avoiding it. Because I think we all know that, you know, this change is the only constant. Change comes to communities. It does happen. And how you manage that is how you maintain the community's character. And this is something I've dealt with throughout my time in Long Meadow and in Lancaster, quite honestly. And sometimes residents disagree with that proposition that, you know, they don't want to see anything change. They don't want to see anything new built. But I think that the practical reality of it is things are going to change, things are going to get built, and how do you handle that? And most communities who take great pride in their character do effectively manage change, and Long Meadow is definitely one of those communities, and I know Acton is as well. And so I think what you have to make sure that you do in these processes is communicate with people what is being proposed or why something should be proposed. Use your zoning bylaws to make sure you're creating the legal infrastructure you need to direct development of certain types to the areas you want it. Or if the community really feels like they don't want things built, use your zoning bylaws within the parameters of Mass General Law and case law to make sure that you have a zoning code that is restrictive but not illegal. And then set a very high bar for developers who want to come in and build in Acton, and something that we've done in Long Meadow as well. You have to take the approach that if they're coming in with a project, they want to build there. And you don't have to give them everything they want or let them do whatever they want, because they do need a site plan approval in most cases from you. They do need a building permit. And so you work with developers collaboratively to say, we'll try and help you get your project through the processes, but here are our expectations of what this is going to be when it gets done. And we've been very successful with that, like I said, in Long Meadow, to minimize the impacts on the character of the community while still fostering that growth. Now like I said, Long Meadow has the highest tax rate, so tax-based expansion in a almost fully built-out community is a real challenge. But I think here, and there's a natural resource component to development here in Acton that we don't have in Long Meadow. We have Cobble Mountain as our water source, and it's not an issue for us. The Springfield Water and Sewer Commission, we're a customer of theirs. So there are, I think, components to this that are a little more challenging for Acton than maybe in Long Meadow. I know the Kelly's Corner project had a setback the other night at town meeting, and that's another thing where that area is already developed. And what is the character of that area? And how do we move, if people are happy with the way it is, do we leave it? If people want to see a change, how do you change it? And make sure that as it evolves, it is an enhancement to what is Acton. I don't know, again, I kind of went all over there, John. I hope I came close. Okay.
It was really interesting, and as tempted as I am to continue along my line, there are a lot of other questions that are generating really interesting responses, but I will go back to one of mine. And this, again, Katie had brought up a little bit about your working relationship with the Selectmen. One of my questions has to do with, okay, if the Selectmen are inclined, and I don't know if it will ever happen, but inclined to go down a road, make a decision that really just seems ill-advised, if it's not illegal, but it's just not a really good idea, that in your view, based on your experience as a town manager, keeping in mind that typically, as on our board, there's nobody who's worked as a professional municipal manager. We know high level what goes on, but not necessarily the nuts and bolts. But what would be your approach would you just try to dissuade the Selectmen somehow from taking that route? What would you do? Propose other options, ask them to consider other potential impacts that might be undesirable because of their proposed decision?
I think the big thing, and this is where, when I read the candidate profile and some of the character traits that are important to Long Meadow, to Acton, these are the character traits that Acton really wants to see are the things that give someone like me the ability to stay committed to my role as town manager, but also committed to what I believe to be in the best interest of the community, while also balancing out my obligation to my direct employer. And the biggest thing is, if what they are asking for is even close to just this side of illegal or unethical or a total disregard for what we know the community wants or what past practice has been, I will certainly make my views known that this is really a path we shouldn't be going down, and at the end of the day, I won't do it. It's not worth it to me to violate my own values and my own sense of my own sense of integrity and honesty for a job. That said, that doesn't happen all that often, and I think that the biggest thing is try and find the third way. I have the way I look at it from a operational process standpoint, and then there's the elected officials like you who have your way of looking at it based on the feedback you're getting from your constituents for whom you work and who you serve. And sometimes those things just don't line up in an easy way, point to point. So is there a way we can work around it or look at it in a different way or come up with a different option? And that's usually what we do. We may have a disagreement about whether our approach is right or not, and then you may not get a 5-0 vote on every initiative like that. You may just have to work with a group of people who seem to be supportive and do what you think is the greatest good for the greatest number. It's complicated. Like I said, a town manager select board or selectman relationship, Long Meadow they changed their charter in 2004 and turned it to select board instead of board of selectmen. But that relationship, like I said, gets close, and you become part of a team, and there are areas of dysfunction and there are areas of disagreement that can happen. But if the bedrock of the relationship of open and honest communication and agreement to disagree from time to time are there, then I have a hard time believing there aren't things you just can't work through. Like I said, so long as they aren't there, as long as they're over that threshold of what is ethical or legal.
Thank you. That's very enlightening, and we still refer to ourselves as the Board of Selectmen, notwithstanding that we typically, all the time I've been on the board, we've had women, at least one woman, sometimes a majority. There, one time there was Mike and the girls, and we haven't had a discussion about changing the name. I know Concord did, and I happen to be one of the few liberated women who was okay with being called a selectman. It doesn't bother me, but anyhow, thank you very much. Katie?
So as you may have heard, our school committee just recently hired a new superintendent who will also start on July 1st. So if you are, and they're a fully regionalized district, so a lot of the decisions and the budget process that they could go through could be done on their own and without sort of cooperation and consultation with the town. Unfortunately, right now, they still participate in our collaborative budgeting process known as the Acton Leadership Group. But if you are chosen as the new town manager, how would you kind of foster a relationship with the new superintendent and between the school committee and the Board of Selectmen to make sure that those collaborations still continue and that they're invested in being part of our group budgeting process?
So whether you're a part of a district or you have your own school system, whether you host your school district or you're a part of a district, it's still Acton's children that are being educated. It's still Acton's tax money that are tax contributions that are paying for that education. And so the biggest thing is making sure we feel like we have a voice that is being heard and that is guiding the administration of the district. And I know Acton Boxborough District is a phenomenal school system, so I'm guessing they've been doing it pretty well for a while. One of the things that I am really proud of in Long Meadow is the relationship that I've been able to develop with the former superintendent and our new superintendent who started last year. We work extremely closely together, and I would expect the same thing with the district superintendent that was just hired here. There are times working together on certain issues where, I'll be honest with you, I take a subordinate role to the superintendent because of what the schools may need and how I can use town resources to support that need. And there are times where the superintendent defers to me because there are issues that usually relate to facilities that are just issues that we have to manage on the general government side, and the superintendent doesn't own the schools don't own the buildings. And it's that need for collaboration and that kind of forced partnership under the charter, largely through facilities, that makes us have to work it out. And the budgeting process, I think, is probably the most glaring example of where we've been able to work together to make sure that the school's needs are being met without taking an undue portion of the annual budget. And this is something, when I first started, there was a conflict between the school committee and the select board over the budget. And I wasn't a part of drafting the budget, but I'd started just before the town meeting, and I saw the conflict and how it played out, and I used to work in a legislative environment, and I kind of know how all that process works, and I said, I'm going to do that a different way, because the schools didn't feel like they got what they needed. They made a stand politically on the floor of town meeting, and they won. And then the budget came out of town meeting unbalanced, and we had to fix it in the fall. I said, doesn't make any sense to me. Why don't we just work it out and see if we can sort that conflict out before we get to town meeting, and if we can't, at least be able to present a a more rational discussion of it at town meeting. And so from that point forward, I worked closely with both superintendents, and we meet monthly as a kind of joint administrative meeting just to talk about, we have a shared IT department. Like I said, we are connected on facilities. There are, unfortunately, and this is it seems to be pervasive, we have a school resource officer that works for the police department, and so there are law enforcement considerations that we are frequently interfacing on. So you have to have that. And whether it's a town school district or a shared school district, all of those things are gonna be in play. And I know Acton is, like I said, it's a great school district, and the town's very proud of being a part of it. And so it's a high priority customer, I guess, for me to serve as manager. And likewise, the district should know that the town of Acton is a high priority customer of theirs to serve.
Joe?
What are your strengths and what are your weaknesses?
So I mean, there's so many different ways to answer this question. I've done the one where you say, well, one of my strengths is I care, and that's also one of my weaknesses. I mean, and that is true, but there's a lot of different ways to answer. But I think for, as you're trying to get to know me as a potential manager, I think one of my strengths is that the bigger the deal, the better I am. And unfortunately, that only gets seen when it's usually a crisis and something unfortunate has happened, which has happened to me a couple times in Long Meadow. So that, I think, is my strength. I think my leadership qualities, the trust that I have earned with my coworkers, that all gets manifested most strongly in times of crisis and when the lights are on and things are happening. The flip side of that record is that there are some smaller issues that sometimes I either don't focus on enough or completely overthink. So I guess that would be one of the strengths, and I'm trying to work on that. But that would be, I think, one of the two greatest strengths, weaknesses that I would describe.
Peter?
Can you talk a little bit about 40B developments in Long Meadow? Where are you in relation to the state goal of 10%? Do you have a housing production plan that's approved by DHCD? Do you have a committee or a board that deals with developers who are looking to build 40B projects?
So I don't have a great answer for this for Long Meadow. We are well below our 10% threshold. We actually have an elected housing authority. They do not control any units at all. As I mentioned, Long Meadow is about 95% built out, and 95% of that build out is single family homes. So even if a developer wanted to come in and do a Chapter 40B development, they would have to assemble so many single family home parcels that it wouldn't pay, especially home prices in Western Mass are obviously lower than they are here in Eastern Mass, so there's not as much to be made, especially when there are communities around us that do have developable land at a much more reasonable cost. However, having worked for both the City of Lowell and the City of Worcester, I have extensive experience working with high-density, large-scale developers. And again, I would go back to the kind of rambling answer to John's previous question. When you're dealing with development, whether it's 40B or mixed use or straight up commercial, you have to be prepared when you interact with the developers. You have to understand what the community wants and what they don't want. You have to understand what are the limits of the community's authority and bylaws. And then you have to work with the developer to say, say it's a by right thing, then just say, okay, how can we work together to make sure this is the best for both of us and find those win-win situations, which you usually can. And I think the challenge is, and this is where those character traits that I talked to come into play, because there are times where it may not win the popular vote, but under the rules that are set forth either in the Commonwealth or under the bylaws, and I'm sure you all have been in this situation many times, there's little you can do at times on these things. And so it's developing the relationship and the rapport to make it the best it possibly can be, and then take the slings and arrows of people who don't want to see it at all and try and explain, look, we wouldn't like it either, but this is what they're legally entitled to do. So there's the educational component for the broader community, and then there is the direct educational component for the project.
Okay, thank you. The Housing Authority, they must have some Section 8. They have rental units? They just have a board with no units?
And listen, the people in the Long Meadow Housing Authority are great people. Their primary job is to write to DHCD every year and say, we're still not at 10%, sorry. And DHCD, they understand, and it's not, and honestly, Longmeadow went from about 1,500 households in 1930 to 5,800 households in 1970. I mean, that's an exceptional amount of build-out in a relatively short period of time. And through all of that, it took up all the land. And so we do have one subsidized senior housing, high-density apartment complex, but that is managed privately.
John?
Steve, I assume you've thought about this in applying for the job. It would require a relocation of you and I assume your family. Is that something you're on board with, and if you were to come here?
You know, I've moved my family halfway across the country twice now. I take life, just kind of one step at a time. There's that dot on the horizon that we generally want to keep the boat pointed towards as a family and for my career and for the education of my children, which is obviously my highest priority. And I want to give my family the best life I possibly can. And I do think that being the town manager of Acton gives me an opportunity to provide a life for them that I think may be better than the great life we currently enjoy in Longmeadow. Nobody's really thrilled about moving and leaving their friends that they've made and doing all of that, but I wouldn't be here if I didn't think this was a right move for me.
Thank you.
All right, I'm looking at the time, and I'm gonna just make this my last question. There are so many questions I would like to ask you, but I've learned so much just from your responses. If you could give one piece of good advice to your college senior self, what would that advice be and why?
Get into high tech and move to Silicon Valley. I mean, I was right at the right time. I could have been on the front end of it, and I could have been Jeff Bezos or something like that. No, I think what's funny is I was a political science major, and then I went right from undergrad to get my master's in public administration, and then I went right from there into working on Capitol Hill, and then right from there to working for the city of Lowell, and you have my resume and on and on. Public service is in my core. I'm passionate about it, and I think I would tell my college self that you're on the right track, but maybe be a little more patient along the way.
Well, thank you very much. We right now we have some time, but I'd like to give you an opportunity to ask questions if you have anything, or if you've overlooked something that you'd like to share with us that didn't come out during today's discussion or in any of your written materials. Feel free.
Well, I just want to say that I was talking to another manager from a community nearby, and they said, just be succinct. And I thought, succinct really isn't my game. And so I just want to make sure that if I didn't answer a question to your satisfaction or to a level of detail, please follow up or let me know. I am passionate about this. I do think I'm ready to be Acton's town manager. I may be very different from Steve Ledoux, but I think it's those differences that are the opportunity for Acton to really get a different kind of leader, a different kind of service, and build on the great platform that he's leaving behind. And I guess I would ask you, what are your expectations for the next town manager? What do you, on the first day, what's going to be the thing that hits my desk that's most important to all of you?
Okay, select board, questions, comments, go ahead. Somebody, John, do you want to start?
Well, you've done your homework on us and your reconnaissance, and over the last 32 years, we've had two town managers. They were Don Johnson for 22, Steve for 10, and they both finished on their normal retirements. They were very different in styles. Don was a very much hands-on micromanager guy. Steve, gave a lot of latitude to his department heads and really encouraged them, and I think they gained from it. Our search committee had interviewed all 19 or 20 department heads, and they didn't have to say this, but they all spoke in glowing terms about him, how appreciative they were of him. So, you're not coming in here to shake things up or, we need an agent of change. You're coming into a very, steady place. And, yesterday a member of the community called, I want to talk to you. These are all outsiders you've got on your list of 4. And I said, they're all people who fit Acton, and you should be very encouraged by that. So we're not looking for, be yourself.
Good.
That's your fit.
Thank you.
Any other selectmen? What?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Peter.
Okay. I told the search committee when they first asked these questions that sustainability is one of the major issues going forward, so I think that would land on your desk. We're working toward getting some consultants on board now that will help us develop a carbon neutral policy or a carbon neutral environment by 2020, and capital initiatives. We've got a new school we got to build. We got new town fire station. Town structures need to be repaired. We put them off for too long. We need to find the money to do that and move forward on those. Other than that, it's the normal litigation over Concord's new water treatment plant, Supreme Judicial Court litigation over community preservation funds, fund religious societies, Kelly's Corner Improvement Initiative, which is supposed to be on the tip for 2022, marijuana policy, sanctuary city policy. All of those I'll drop on your desk gladly the first day, and we expect you to run with them.
We now return you to your regularly scheduled headaches. So I do want to add, and I don't want to overstep my time, but I do want to add that one of the things that I am really excited about with this opportunity is in each successive stop that I've had along my career, I've come into, I've plugged in at the time of my start into either dormant or just starting major initiatives or major issues. And I think if I'm most proud of anything from a work deliverable standpoint, it's that I left those jobs of my own volition for better opportunities, and upon my leaving, those biggest problems were solved. And I look at things like Kelly's Corner as a great, that's in my wheelhouse, to be honest with you. But I look at all that other stuff, the job of being a town manager is trying to sort through all those things and keep your head and determine what are the facts, what's the future, and how do we get those things lined up in a way that makes sense for everybody. So I do think that, I appreciate you saying that. I do think from a, and my cover letter says it, there are so many similarities between the town I'm in now and this town. I mean, we don't have enough time to talk about all the sustainability initiatives I've spearheaded in Long Meadow. But I think my experience in handling challenging issues like that will serve this community very well.
Anybody else? Katie?
No, I just want to add, in addition, I think Peter covered some of the major and varied issues. We're an exciting town, but also just that idea of, I think, immediately we want our new town manager to be somebody who's going to build that trust and relationships with not only our town staff, but also the board individually and as a whole, and with the residents in our community. So it's a big undertaking, but, obviously you've done it before in other communities, and so we'd look forward to you doing that here as well.
If I may just, and John has heard this one before, but one of the things that I've done as a manager is on my first time meeting with the department heads, usually on the first day, I have said, you have my trust today. I'm giving it to you freely and fully today because we have too many things to do to try and build that trust. Our goal is to keep it and maintain that trust. I do think this is an outstanding organization. Every bit of research I've done has shown me that. And I think it'll be easy for me to place my trust in not only the department heads, but all town employees and the board implicitly from the start. And there are times where trust can erode with, coworkers or, or situational erosion of trust based on stuff happening. But I think the biggest thing is coming in and saying, we're a team, let's move forward as best we can, and let's make sure we're honest with each other, and like I said, we keep that trust well into the future.
Any last words? Okay. Well, let me add to the list that Peter gave, just capital improvement plan, and because we have a committee that's working on it, and the current town manager has been part of the group along with finance and a FinCom member, and I'm representing the board, and I have to say that it's reached sort of been in hiatus for a while. And the other thing is sewer district expansion, so fun things for you to think about, how much fun it would be if you were picked as town manager. So with that, I'm going to thank you on behalf of all of us. I think that I speak for everyone when I say it's been a real delight to sit down here and have a conversation with you and hear all about the things that you've done. It's been really educational. I think I just learned a lot, and as I said, if time allowed, there were a lot of other issues that I'd like to pick your brain about. But anyhow, thank you very much for taking a time out of your Saturday, coming all the way out here to the eastern part of the state. But anyhow, to be here and help us out, really appreciate it.
And thank you so much. I really appreciate it as well.
Thank you.
Janet, I'd just like to say thank you to the committee that brought these excellent candidates to us. I really appreciate the hours that they spent interviewing and studying and getting these responses, because I think this day went very smoothly with very excellent candidates. So thank you all very much.
Yeah, no, I think we'll wait for Mr. Mercier to come back up before we adjourn, but it has been, a pretty intense day, but a really, this was fun. I don't know about the candidates, it's probably a little intense for them, but I think it was just a lot of fun because the candidates were all really, really excellent. Just reading, when I read the materials Thursday night after that kind of not really pleasant meeting anyhow, after a not very pleasant town meeting, I went home, and instead of just relaxing, I took out the packet of application materials and started going through them, and I got engaged, as tired as I was, and I thought, oh, I really like this person, okay, I like all four, this is a problem. And I went back through them yesterday, and I had the same reaction. I thought, oh, this is really, somebody else better make this decision, because I like all of them for very different reasons. And this is part of the reason that today was, it's work, but it was really just a lot of fun. It really is a very interesting group and with a lot of interesting insights. So yeah, I echo what Joan said. And we really can't thank you enough for all of the work you invested, because this day has really gone well, at least from my perspective too. Anybody else? All right, are we all inclined to sort of let all of this stuff steep until Monday? And because we do, we could, we have the room until 3 o'clock and probably could go longer, but I don't know if people just they're ready to go home. If they are, we can adjourn. If people want to talk a little bit more perhaps about Monday. I don't know, Bob, if you have any insight about.
I do.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the board members for coming out. Of course, I've also thanked Pat and her committee many times. It was a joy working with them. And I concur with what I think I heard here tonight. You are very fortunate to have 4 very qualified individuals. The tough part is going to be making a decision. And that is not going to be easy, because as I sat here, and these are former peers of mine, I know how the depth of quality you have that sat in front of you today, and I hope answered your questions sufficiently. I think, in my mind, they did, and we could have spent more time with some of them. But I think you got a very good perspective of who you're dealing with through the questions that you asked and the written materials that you've all read and saw their expertise. So what I would suggest, unless the board's going to continue to discuss here today, if we go to Monday, that the board members reread the materials that were submitted, just to refresh your memory, because it was a quick turnaround. Think about and process what you heard today from the interviewees. And I know that's difficult, but you're going to have to silo each one of them and kind of pick and choose what you thought you heard vis-a-vis what they actually said. You may be able to rewatch it on TV. Think about what characteristics did you like about each individual candidate. That's going to help in how you individually score yourself as to who you think you want to move forward. Think about what traits of each of the candidates do you think will make that person the right fit for both you and for the community, your residents. Just think about what you saw here, what you read, about the type of traits you think would help that person ingratiate himself or herself to this community and to you as the employer. Be prepared to discuss at length and I hope, come out with a consensus on Monday night as to who you think should be the next manager here in Acton. If you do that, I will be here, and if you reach that consensus, we can make that evening a conditional offer of employment with the town of Acton, subject to, of course, successful negotiations with the contract, subject to the finality of the background investigation that MRI will conduct. And I think, Madam Chair, we told you, sometimes that takes upwards of 2 weeks. Some of these folks, we have some information on already. They've been in some of our processes, so we're not going to reinvent the wheel on that. So they will, we have some of that information depending on who you come up with. If anything comes up over the next day and a half, 2 days, that you want questions answered, call me. Jen, you have, I think, Katie, you have my number. Email me, whatever, if there's any issues that you're concerned about. I will tell you, you will likely hear from folks here in Acton who watched this today, who may want to impart their suggestions to you for Monday night, and that's fine. That's part of the process. And you'll have to take that information in, digest it, and figure out how it all fits in with where you want to go with the next town manager here. So I think we're scheduled, Madam Chair, for 7? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And
is that...
there are no emails in here from eager residents asking questions or making comments. We're getting a little campaign going here. We're getting some campaign messages from some residents about, well, I want this guy or that person. Or,
Yep. And you're going to get some of that. And, you know, the good news on that is you have residents who are interested. This is an important decision for this board. You know that. So you have some people that are interested and watched it today, which is good. So again, Janet, you and I have linked up on a number of occasions. You know where I am. If anything comes up that you want some clarification on in terms of the process on Monday, just give me a ring. Or any other questions that the board may have.
Yeah, and if anybody on the board wants to talk to Bob over the weekend, let me know, and I can give you his contact information. But, well, over the weekend, we have one more day, so, or Monday, anyhow. So, yeah. But, all right, with that, are we prepared to adjourn, or people want to stretch this out for another couple of hours?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Okay, Katie moves and Peter seconds. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, abstaining. Thank you. And thank you very much, Bob, for coming out and facilitating and sharing lunch with us.